keen on. The daily now.tv chat show with some of the world's leading thinkers and writers. Hello, everybody. It is Friday, February the 16th, 2024. Welcome, as always, on a Friday to That Was the Week, although in a way, perhaps today, the show should be renamed That Will Be the Week. It's 3 weeks till the Oscars, the annual celebration in Southern California of movies. But Keith Teare, as a typical Northern Californian, thinks he's ahead of Southern California, and he's already given out the Oscars. Even though there's 3 weeks till the great ceremony, he has given the Oscar, at least in That Was the Week's newsletter for this week, to Teare, the AI animated movie intelligence. So, Keith, are you suggesting that you know more than the people who do the Oscars? Is Teare going to get the Oscar in 3 weeks' time?
Well, just a little detail, Andrew. It does say 2026. It doesn't.
Oh, whoops!
It doesn't say 2024. So
I missed that.
So I am saying,
so we're even that will be the week in 2 years and 3 weeks.
Exactly, because Teare, for those who don't yet know, Teare is the name OpenAI has given to its video generation platform, and it produced a whole bunch of demo videos, typically around a minute long. They are mind-blowingly good, and
yeah, and your favorite, which I watched, was Snow Dogs.
Yeah, it's really good, and the you know, it made me think, when was it that we thought it would be normal for Netflix and Apple TV or Amazon Prime to be nominated for Oscars for stuff they produced? I don't think it was that long ago. It would have been really weird not that long ago to think that that could happen. So I actually think it's very likely that AI is going to produce whole movies.
Yeah, and they're going to have to change the awards. The current model is you give awards obviously for movies, but for actors, for cinematography, for film editing. Is AI going to change all that, Keith? I mean, you still tend to be, I mean, this is all so open, but you still tend to be relatively optimistic. You think it will be a boon to the movie industry. Some people are much less optimistic.
Well, that's a longer conversation about the balance between human creativity and tools. I don't expect the tools will be very good without human creativity. I think they'll be, you know,
they'll be on the level of your art that you use for That Was the Week, I think.
Exactly. So I don't it would take me 10 years to learn art to produce that image. So my skills are lacking, but my creative brain had something like that in it. And the tool let me extract from my brain something that I couldn't possibly have done without lots of training. And
so tell me a little bit more about Teare. I mean, I looked at the video, and the Snow Dogs video, it is good. Is it hard to do? I mean, do you need to have any skills in cinematography to be able to use Teare?
Well, they haven't released it to the public yet. It's still in test. So the answer is I don't know. But according to what I read, I link in the newsletter to a whole technical document that they released. It is simply a prompt. It is, the prompt for the dog video was literally one sentence long, and the intelligence figured out the camera angles, the close up, what kind of dogs, how it interacted with the snow. All of that was done in the AI. So I think the answer is you don't need any skills at all. You just need the idea.
So the winners of the Oscars in 2026, it's not going to be companies. It's going to be creative individuals who know how to ask questions, to give prompts. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the movie Avatar, which is probably the movie we most think of as being state of the art, you know, in terms of use of FX, I've got to imagine movies at that level of quality will be able to be produced by AI much faster. I mean, Avatar took years, right? Years.
Teams. I mean, when you go to these, especially these animated films, there's about a 10-minute section at the end of the film just to list the people who created it.
Right. So now I don't think the kind of script quality of a Toy Story or an Avatar is going to come out of AI. I do think talented script writers are going to use AI to produce scripts faster and edit them quicker and turn them into at least storyboard level video faster. I mean, the whole production process, really, from the idea all the way through to the end result, is going to be impacted.
Lots of startups, Keith, in this space. I know one or two entrepreneurs with their own. And in your essays of the week this week, you talk about AI unicorns. I haven't heard you mention unicorns positively for months, if not years. Is this AI revolution sparking more optimism when it comes to billion-dollar startups?
Not yet. I'd say it's slow. To give you a sense of it, that article's by my wife, Jenny, on Crunchbase, and she makes the point that there were 95 unicorns last year compared to 600 in 2021. So clearly the number of unicorns being produced is much smaller. And then she notes that a lot of them are coming out of AI, and she names Mistral as one of those. And Light Matter is another one. And Maintain X, which is an industrial digitization platform for manufacturing. Now, those three, you start to understand that AI is going to move from digital to physical world. Obviously, it already is. Like a Tesla production line uses AI to make cars, and there's a lot of robots and less people. But it's going to go much further, much faster. I think it makes Tesla's attempt to do a walking, talking robot a little bit more interesting. The recent demos have shown a lot of progress. So how long before we get from AI that we can use as a tool to AI that can do work that otherwise we would have to do? I don't know how long that is in years. I mean, my pessimistic side would say 10 years. My optimistic side would say 3 years from now, there'll be something we don't expect.
Well, 10 years, as you know, is really a punt, saying we have no idea. And speaking of punting, last week was the Super Bowl, which unfortunately San Francisco lost. Your newsletter talks about 40, has a piece from the New York Times. 40 years ago, this ad, the famous Apple ad, changed the Super Bowl forever. When you were watching the Super Bowl last week, did you think of that ad? I'm not sure how.
I didn't think of that ad. I watched the Super Bowl, and therefore I watched most of the ads, which was, I think, quite underwhelming. That Super Bowl ad that Apple did, and by the way, the New York Times article is very good. It goes into a lot of detail with the players who were active at the time as to how that ad emerged, and it's a lot more.
It's a Ridley Scott produced ad, very famous. I think it's won all sorts of awards. Ridley Scott, of course, still going. He just came out with his new movie Napoleon. So
now, what's interesting is how bold the vision was, and how radical they intended to be. They were really pointing the finger at big tech as it then was, which is mainly IBM, and saying they were going to disrupt it.
Remind us, Keith, historically, back in 1984. I know you weren't really born then, but what was the situation? What was Apple advertising in '84?
Well, Apple had gone through some. It was at the end of a very hard time, and was releasing the new Mac, the first, that Mac that was like a box with a screen in it, and IBM and Microsoft dominated home computing. You could buy a PC with a tiny hard drive, or some of them only had floppy drives, for a lot of money, and they didn't do very much, and they were based on DOS. That is to say, the interface was green words and dots. It wasn't graphical, and Apple basically produced something at roughly the equivalent price point that was graphical, stealing a lot of ideas from Xerox PARC. It had a mouse, which was the first time the mouse came about as a mass market thing, at least. And so it was truly revolutionary, and it had software that, you know, was not that different to the software we use today.
And the ad is memorable. It shows a young woman, a young athlete, throwing a hammer at a screen and liberating all these 1984 style clones. It's seen, I guess, almost as an extinction event in terms of tech. Right. And we have another extinction event, apparently, at least in one of your links, Keith, this week in the New Yorker about, is the media prepared for an extinction level event? It's kind of AI. It's about the end of media, of newspapers, of online magazines. What did you make of this New Yorker piece? It's certainly not the first or the last of its type.
Yeah, I think it's a gathering together of a bunch of threads that have been in the ether for the last couple of years, really, but have accelerated with the rise of AI, which is what we've talked about 2 or 3 times now on the show, which is if AI is good at delivering the stuff you need, why will you ever go to the source? And I think that is the question that runs through that article. It's a long article, well thought through.
Yeah, I thought it was very good. It's by Claire Malone. Of course, though, it also means that if you never go to the source, that source will go away because no one will be paying the journalist who's actually creating the news. So in the end, the news or the information on AI will be premised on, at best, amateurs, sometimes propaganda or states or fantasists of one kind or another.
But it's kind of interesting to think about the whole value chain of information that starts, you know, hyper local actually, and then, you know, historically how you know the Morse code system that existed with a telegraph, which then led to the emergence of things like Reuters and Associated Press, which then fed all these privately owned media houses. That entire value chain really goes. I don't even really know why it still exists when you've got 4 billion people with smartphones, and you've got information passing at the speed of light from anywhere in the world to anywhere else in the world. And
don't you pay for subscriptions? Don't you pay for the New York Times?
I do, but I pay for depth and quality, which I still will. I don't think that stops. But
isn't that what That Was the Week is? Curated by Keith Teare? You couldn't curate this with AI, or you could, but it wouldn't be as good.
I certainly could try to curate everything except the editorial.
Well, you could get AI to write the editorial.
Yeah, but then it wouldn't be me. I wouldn't.
But then the curation wouldn't be you either. You wouldn't choose.
Actually,
choose different stuff.
No. I tell you what, there's a lot of inefficiency in my. I'll tell you where it would really help. I read stuff every day, and I basically bookmark stuff that's intended for curation, and that bookmark lives in a website called Feedly. That list has a RSS feed, but I have to manually go and copy and paste each article into Substack every week, and there is no good tool yet that will read my Feedly and create my curated list with headings and topic areas like.
I got the title, Keith, of this show. Read my Feedly. Sounds a bit vulgar, doesn't it? We'll have to send that to Sinead.
Funnily enough, if you follow my Twitter, you will see every article that I bookmark in real time. And
well, I'm going to read your Feedly. Are you going to? How many Feedlys do you have, Keith?
1.
Oh. Well, a lot of this stuff's going to end up in court. It already is. And you have a couple of pieces this week that talk about upcoming court cases that may shape our new economy and determine whether or not this is indeed an extinction event. There's the New York Times versus OpenAI copyright lawsuit, and then there's an upcoming Supreme Court hearing actually early next week about whether the government can seize control of YouTube and Twitter. What do you make of these two, and what are the two articles suggesting?
Well, Mike from O'Reilly Media, who I imagine must be Greek, Mike Loukidis, he actually takes a different point of view than his boss, Tim O'Reilly. He argues that OpenAI may pay as little as $1 million publishers to allow it to train on their data. And he thinks that it's not a terribly high price, and it could go as high as 5 million, but those are numbers that are small enough that OpenAI would happily pay. So he's basically predicting that there'll be an accommodation between the media industry and AI, because even the media industry will want its own AIs. You can't imagine.
Has OpenAI got good lawyers? Are they tooling up, so to speak, Keith?
Well, they inevitably do have good lawyers because they raised a lot of money. So I don't think they're aggressive, though. I think they're trying to figure out a legitimate fit, if you will, in the ecosystem. The other article is a bit different. That's the government. So whereas we're talking about businesses doing deals in the O'Reilly piece, in the Vox piece, it's about government, and it's specifically the Florida government, having gotten a case all the way up to the Supreme Court that allows them to seize control of curation.
And the Vox piece that you link has a photograph of Florida's governor, a certain Ron DeSantis, which probably most Vox readers aren't particularly keen on.
Yeah, if you go back to the 1984 ad, this really is Big Brother. This is the idea of the government, having an opinion about what legitimate speech is, and secondly, having the power to enforce it by taking over private businesses. So it really is kind of...
So what's the point? So Florida and Texas don't want YouTube and Twitter, it's called Twitter. I mean, I think Vox should know they changed their name, but social media platforms to more aggressively edit what they have on their platforms?
Yeah, and the inspiration for this is the belief that these social media platforms are biased to the left and that they are censoring the right, which...
When was the last time they looked at X? That maybe that's why they talk about Twitter, which no longer exists. Twitter was to the left, but X seems to be more to the right.
Yeah, but it's kind of it's a very ironic stance, because when you think about it, the belief that these platforms should be open is now something championed by Republicans, and not particularly liked by, in quotes, the left. And so here you've got the Republicans arguing that they're not open enough, and that government would be a better adjudicator, if you will.
Right, but then these things always depend on the context. So conservatives are always in favor of some sort of government intervention if they think the media is controlled by the left, and vice versa with the left. And they're always in favor of openness if the media is doing what they want the media to do, or covering what they want the media to cover.
Quite right. In other words,
all these arguments are self-serving.
Yeah, they're totally unprincipled.
Except for you and I, of course, Keith. Would we describe ourselves as the two last principled men on earth?
I don't think we'd be the two last. Maybe we'd be the penultimate.
The two most distinguished. How about that? Two oldest.
Yeah, certainly handsomest.
Grayest, handsomest. Well, you speak for yourself. But in all seriousness, we've talked about this so many times. You believe that there shouldn't be any restrictions on what these platforms publish. I'm not so sure. At some point, someone has to determine, whether it's government or the owners of these platforms, or perhaps the users, they all have to determine what does and doesn't get shown, don't they?
I don't think anyone should determine what does and doesn't get shown.
Whether they should or they should or they shouldn't is one issue, but in reality, someone will, for better or worse.
They will, but then, like all issues of liberty, you've got to resist. Otherwise, the end is predetermined as being an end you wouldn't particularly want to be living in. And Steve Jobs would have to come back from the grave and make another.
Well, he doesn't need to come back because he's got you as one of the last principled men on earth.
Exactly.
So you're standing up for the openness, and we've had this conversation so many times before, Keith, but something shouldn't appear. What about propaganda?
Propaganda is a legitimate form of an attempt to influence opinion. I mean,
but if people don't know it's propaganda, if it's being published by Putin or DeSantis or some other group,
propaganda is just another word for trying to influence opinion in your favor, and it's a legitimate human endeavor. Now, of course, there are narrower definitions of propaganda assigned to the Nazis, for example, that correlate propaganda to, for example, the Holocaust. And it's true that propaganda can, at a certain point, spill over into law breaking. And I think that's the right place to be. There are laws. We vote for, people who legislate them, and you can't break them.
And any guesses in these two cases how they're going to turn out? The OpenAI New York Times case and the Supreme Court one?
I actually don't know. I'd be shocked if the Supreme Court sides with Florida and Texas, to be honest.
Even if it's a conservative court.
Yeah, but I think I actually am naive enough to believe that even conservative judges care about the law and the Constitution enough to not make decisions that are unconstitutional.
And where does this all leave OpenAI? You've been very bullish in the past, Keith, about OpenAI. You've talked about it becoming, maybe by the Oscars of 2026, the most powerful company in the world. What's your sense of the state of OpenAI, particularly in the context of Sora, its release in February of 2024?
I think this week has reinforced my view that OpenAI is going to have its fingers in literally trillions of dollars of value creation in the decades ahead. And it may need to figure out, some of its structures to optimize that, but it's going to be right in the middle of changing everything. Google this week announced that it, 2 weeks after its previous launch, has released Gemini 1.5, which is capable of doing 10. I've mentioned it in the editorial, but it isn't one of the articles. But there's a link to an article about it in the editorial, and it can cope with 10 million.
Well, why is that good for OpenAI? They're the most direct competitor.
It's a direct reaction to OpenAI. So OpenAI is the catalyst for lots of innovation at Google. Google has a lot to lose. It has a revenue stream based on.
What do you make also? I'm not sure if you had a link in this week's newsletter. There were a couple of headlines which seemed rather surreal to me of Altman, and this is not with him wearing his OpenAI hat, or maybe he's wearing more than one hat, trying to raise $14 trillion for some chip startup.
I think that's been poo-pooed. I don't think it's factual. I do think he's trying to build, NVIDIA this week is now worth more than Amazon and Alphabet. So the chip business for AI is very, very lucrative. And there is only one game in town right now, NVIDIA. So I do think Altman is trying to raise money to have a competitor to NVIDIA.
So I wonder, though, if he did. I mean, I don't know how you raised $14 trillion. It's almost the entire world GDP. But if he did, what would that mean for OpenAI? It's not going to be an OpenAI company.
Well, what it means is there'll be a sunk cost to having the hardware that can produce, you know, a 90-minute or 2-hour movie in minutes. So the future of AI is correlated to the future of infrastructure. And clearly, those companies in the infrastructure business for AI are doing very, very well and will continue to do. And it doesn't surprise me that the leading operators in AI would like to be free of having to pay lots of money to other companies. And to do that, getting their own chips would be part of that. Google, by the way, has been doing that for a long time. And so has Amazon. There's a lot of deep tech there. It's to do with FPGA chips and different kinds of chips, neural networks. There's a lot of science there, but the short story is if you don't want to be paying a lot of money to third parties, you've got to build your own.
I don't suppose they'll serve chips, Keith, at the Oscars coming up. Why computer chips or English chips, which in America are called French fries. I was actually rather surprised. You gave the Oscar to Sora in 2026, but what you didn't do, and you're in complete control of your startup of the week, is you didn't give the startup of the week this week to OpenAI. You've probably done it so many times in the past, you needed to find someone else. So you found Brett Taylor's new AI company. Tell me about that and remind us who Brett Taylor is.
So Brett Taylor was most recently CEO at Salesforce, and he's now the chairman of the board at OpenAI. And way back, he did FriendFeed, which was, I don't know if you remember using FriendFeed.
Yeah, I remember Steve Gilmore used to champion that.
Yeah. So Brett Taylor is a serial innovator with a lot of success behind him. And he is now turned his mind to a company called Teare. And Teare is a platform to automate mundane tasks in businesses, like updating databases and things that typically humans do. He's startup of the week because A, of who he is, and B, he's raised some money.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. In a sense, he's doing what every other startup AI company, from obviously from OpenAI to all the other platforms. Is this just a narrower version?
Yeah, it's an application. It's a bit like applied math versus math in general. He's basically applying the AI techniques to corporate tasks, mundane ones. There's a company called UiPath that I invested in that is now worth a lot of money in public, that started doing this about a decade ago out of Romania, actually, and then London. And they were an earlier version of enterprise automation.
So what would this mean, though? I mean, wouldn't Anthropic or OpenAI or Gemini, ultimately, won't they be able to do this? Why would Teare be able to compete with one of these larger platforms?
So, well, some of the reaction to the announcement has said that it's going to be highly challenging because large language models are not good at linear decision making. So this is a different set of problems. It's like, how do you make sure it doesn't put the wrong field in the database? There was a case today where Air Canada's chatbot told a customer that who was looking for a bereaved ticket, that the chatbot said, well, the way you get that is you pay a full price and then you claim it back afterwards. So the customer did that, only to find out the chatbot was wrong, that you actually have to do it ahead of time and get approval ahead of time. And it went to court, and the judge just found that Air Canada is responsible for the.
Well, they are if the chatbot's on Air Canada, but not if it's on Teare.
It's on Air Canada. So basically, decision making, enterprise decision making, when it comes down to filling databases with correct information, is a totally different problem set to large language models. So there's going to be some pain in learning and delivering, but you could probably bet on Brett Taylor figuring that out.
So are you betting on him? Would you invest, Keith, in Teare?
I think I would.
Well, everyone's throwing their hats into the AI ring. And one of your favorite tech people, Elad Gil, one of your heroes, has got X of the week for his X on AI. Tell me about this X, Keith.
So Elad Gil is an investor that has been in lots of successful companies and is right in the middle of Silicon Valley when it comes to what's going on. And yesterday he posted that he feels like we're now on a slope leading into the singularity. The singularity is a phrase used by followers of, what's that guy's name?
Ray Kurzweil.
Ray Kurzweil. To describe a moment when innovation goes so fast that humans can't keep up with it anymore. I don't think we're quite there yet. I'm finding I can keep up with it, so I don't think we're quite there yet. But if the machines start training themselves and improve what they can do in a non-linear way, we will get there. And Elad Gil is basically saying he's looking at that becoming a real thing now.
Yeah, and judging from the imagery in the X, I'm not sure he's particularly thrilled with it. Is it a warning or a celebration?
It's probably a little bit of both, but mostly knowing him a little bit, not personally, but just through observing, I think it's probably optimistic.
Optimistic in the sense that he thinks it's a good thing?
A good thing, yeah.
And do you agree? Do you agree with Gil that, and I'm quoting the X again, working in AI right now feels like the early slope, he's obviously a skier, leading into the singularity, so much happening so quickly?
I think it is a good thing, because who doesn't want to do less because machines do more? I mean, that to me is the very definition of.
Yeah, but you just acknowledged that you could do less and not personally curate your newsletter, but then it wouldn't be the same thing.
It would be the same thing if I'm feeding it the curated stories. It would just do the grunt work. That's Brett Taylor's point.
So maybe, Keith, a headline for me is read my feedly. You're not telling our audience, you're telling the AI, read my feedly. Is that right?
I've tried, actually. It doesn't do a good job yet.